I think from my experience in Central and Eastern Europe, it is a longer process in terms of teaching people about the concepts, but I believe that as people start to grow an awareness of what the capabilities are in terms of offering a blended solution, they'll be more willing to accept the solutions into their existing learning culture. The main one is awareness, getting the message across to key members of organisations that are still on the edge or thinking about making the jump into e-learning. So I would say the key point is driving awareness and allowing them to understand best practice from examples that we've talked about today.
Chris zo spoločnosti Skillsoft nám povie o leadershipe. So,
Okay.
Chris,
Yeah. Thank you.
stage is yours. Ďakujeme.
I think I was told earlier it's ahoy to say hello in Slovakian, so ahoy everybody. Thank you for having me here today. Thank you, Juraj, for inviting me here as well. It's been a pleasure and it's very interesting. I'm a bit worried about going to a coffee shop now because there are so many faux pas in my delivery of drinking coffee when I do and I have to, then I need to be a bit worried in the future. But very interesting and something I'll watch out for going forward. So I'm going to talk briefly about leadership in learning today, and what I wanted to talk to you about initially is my background, a bit of introduction to me. I've been working with Skillsoft for 3 years now, and prior to that I worked for a company called QA, who are based in the UK, and they focus on classroom training. So I've actually seen both sides of the coin from a classroom training perspective and also a digital learning perspective. And obviously what I'd like to talk to you about today is the ability to blend learning solutions together. So rather than talk about Skillsoft, I've put a video on here that will hopefully explain a bit more about what we do, and I'll just launch that video now. Okay, so hopefully that gives you a very quick snapshot. I've got about 15 minutes for this presentation, so I'll try and get through it. So in essence, what we're delivering here is the ability for learners to learn different modalities of content within their organization. We accept that, and we all know that people learn in different ways. So therefore, you need to provide content that allows you to deliver against the learner's needs. We want to deliver an unparalleled experience for those end users. And what you can see around the screen are different types of modalities that we can deliver. Today we're going to be looking at a specific element of our leadership portfolio, but obviously it's just to give you that good high-level overview of what we do outside of leadership. So, leadership. I looked at a few statistics to put this presentation together, and I took them from a source called Bursim by Deloitte. Some of you might know it. But actually what we found with regard to leadership is that investment levels are at an all-time high, and specifically in the senior and high potential realm, so CEOs, senior directors and executives. It's also growing in first-time and mid-level leaders, but these are really the focus areas. Now, interestingly, this research was done, and it was also done at the same time as collating these statistics. Now, some of these were quite shocking to me. The fact that 3/4 of leadership teams failed to achieve their business objectives. It's quite interesting, considering the investments that are going on. 50% of executives view their mid-level leaders as highly capable. So only 50%. That's quite a challenging number. And of course, 30% of their first-line leaders are seen as being highly capable. So the most shocking one for me, actually, the shocking one here, was 75% of the respondents to that particular piece of surveying said that their existing programs that they had internally weren't effective at all, or weren't delivering what the expectation of the company was. So it questions the previous slide in terms of, if we're making all those investments into leadership learning, what's happening on the other side of it? We're not delivering against what the expectations are. So what is the impact of all this investment? So what are we thinking, or what's being advised to be done about this? Well, some of the companies are being told that we need to build a stronger pipeline in terms of delivering a talent pool so that we can reinforce our leaders for the future. The reason we do this is that when we were talking to the executives, they actually cited that 30% of them cited that one of their biggest concerns was succession planning, who's going to take over. And that statistic at the bottom, again, was another one that shocked me, is that within 5 years, 83% of CEOs will be moving on from their position. So who's going to take that spot? Do you source from out of the business, or do you source from within the business? There's different arguments for both. So that's something to consider going forward. So how can Skillsoft support this demand for learning? Well, what I'd like to talk to you about briefly today is Skillsoft Leadership Advantage, SLA for short. It's a platform that's scalable, so it will deliver across all levels of leaders. Importantly, the content is concise. So we've taken into consideration that managers have very little time to learn in the days that we live in now, and therefore we need to deliver short, specific content to reach those areas that those leaders and managers are requiring. And finally, and probably most importantly, it links into what you're trying to do already. So we acknowledge that there is investment already in classroom and traditional styles of learning, and therefore it's about supporting and reinforcing some of the elements that you're already doing successfully. So what I'm going to do, rather than talk about it, is just take you into it very briefly, and I'm conscious of my time, so I'm only going to touch on some of the areas of it, but hopefully it'll give you an overview of what this portal looks like, and it links into what I was talking about, the importance of creating something that's very specific and, importantly, easy to use. So here is the interface of the Leadership Advantage portal. And within Leadership Advantage, we will have what we call 41 competencies. You can see them here. I'm hovering over them now. And each of these competencies have been linked to a key area on the left-hand side. So developing your team, we have accountability coaching. If I go into this area here, what I'll be presented with is something very specific and topical to leading change, and all of the content that's within this particular competency will be related to this specific topic. As you can see on the left-hand side, I talked about having concise material that's easy to digest, bite-sized chunks. This is what the Leadership Advantage main strength is, the fact that it can deliver particularly targeted content to leaders within a certain track. So what I'm going to do is just launch a video quickly to let you see how that looks and feels. If it doesn't work, hopefully you've understood the concept of what I'm trying to tell you in a very short space of time. But what you can see is we have embedded videos, executive summaries from books, simulations, gamification, as we've discussed already in both presentations with Nicola as well, and the fact that all of that combined is a very powerful option for clients. If we look at the track index, which gives you a summary of what's included in this particular track, so at the moment we're looking at leading change, what we can find is there are content that you can read and take away with you. There's content that you can watch and again download and take away with you. And there's content importantly that you can apply to your working environment. So it's about bringing it back into the working environment and actually being able to use that as a facilitation guide or even a discussion guide. Looks like the video is not going to work, so we'll go back into the track. So when we're exploring the track in itself, there are a few subcategories. So we have, do you need it? We have a core message, which, as the name is self-explanatory, gives you a very short snapshot overview of the content in this whole 1 hour and 45-minute track. Then we have an explore in depth section, which I've just been in, a challenge yourself, which reflects the simulation type environment, and then a more formal area where you can take a test to almost formalize the learning that's happening. I mentioned leader-led activities, and here you'll find content that you can actually download and bring back into the workplace. And of course, you have the freedom to modify those PowerPoints or modify those Word documents to reflect your culture of your organization. So I think that's about enough, all the time I have to share on that. If there's more questions, I'm happy to answer them. Uri and I will be happy to show you as well after this session today. So I'll just jump back into the presentation, please. So yeah, let's look at challenges to leadership. So typically, leadership training in the territories that I manage, so I look after the UK, France, Central and Eastern Europe, and also the Middle East. And obviously in all of those wide territories, there are a lot of different cultural changes between organizations and the way that they train their leaders. What we have found is that, a lot of it is focused on one-on-one coaching, a lot of it is focused on classroom training, and in some instances, some of the more forward-thinking organizations are looking at online learning resources as well. It will obviously depend on the audience type, and that's where the flexibility of online learning and classroom learning blended together really has powerful repercussions. So what are the challenges in terms of the traditional learning? So in the territories that I normally engage with clients, the traditional way of learning, especially from a leadership point of view, and especially at a senior management level, is classroom. The challenge to that, and the most obvious one, is the cost associated with doing it. So it can be costly to run classroom only for multiple people. So sometimes you have to refine who you associate with having that classroom session with. The second point is, if you do take someone out of the classroom, and I think it's really positive to do that, to attend a class and to be out of your working environment, I think is very good for the person and very good for the learning mechanism. If it's a longer period of time, say 3 to 5 days, that can have a negative effect on productivity coming back into the working environment. So it's about weighing up the pros and cons of doing it in that way. And finally, it's about retention. So if I attended a session today, what I've learned or I've observed today in today's session, there's a theory, and I'll come on to it in a second, that some of that retention will be lost. I might not remember everything. And that's something we need to think about when we're thinking about the learning mechanisms in the environments that we all work within today. Herman Ebbinghaus, that's his name, came up with a forgetting curve or forgetting theory. And in essence, what he said was, if you don't apply what you're learning within a short period of time, you're going to forget it. So some of this was quite shocking as well. Without a context, 50% can be forgotten in 1 hour. 80% is forgotten in 6 days, and up to 90% in 31 days. I hope that's not true, because I don't hope my memory's not that bad. But if we think about the consequences, and going back to that investment slide, all that investment, and then how are we able to sort of show what we've brought back to the workplace for that investment? So we need to bear that in mind. So what does Skillsoft do, and how can we help? Well, we can train employees at all levels, and we can do it in an affordable way, so in a cost-effective manner that links into your existing programs. We're not trying to replace what you're doing in any respect. What we're trying to do is link in and make sure that reinforcement is happening. We can use our content as pre-work. We can use our content as post-work. So thinking about that reinforcement, burning in the information into your brain, being able to go back to something just to touch upon it in a short 5-minute segment to reinforce and refresh and remind you. And that's the critical point. And of course, the content that we provide stays current. So it comes from global thought leaders around the world, and therefore you're able to sort of inspire, ask questions and think about things that you wouldn't have done in a normal working day. So thinking about Skillsoft as a solution provider, we touched upon the leader-led activities I showed you on the portal very quickly. I was going to show you a video, but it didn't play, so we'll have to blame the Wi-Fi for that. But video-based assets are another way that companies that we're working with will blend their solutions, blend their existing learning programs. And of course, portals, as Juraj referred to, as I've referred to, they are a fantastic way of both delivering formal and informal training to organizations. The key thing here is looking at how we create the blended leadership programs. And we can't forget mobile, of course. We've touched on it, Juraj touched on it earlier. It's a critical part of being able to access learning on demand, especially from a leadership principle. So content needs to be delivered in a format that's easy to use and digestible. So final 2 slides. Skillsoft will work with you, will work through our partner e-learnmedia to deliver content to you. But it's not just about content, it's about delivering the right messaging and having the right tools to be able to drive awareness, to drive users to come back and use the content over and over again. And we use what we call best practice building blocks, and engagement would be the time when I would talk to the executives, the management team, to understand what the objectives are, what your success criteria is, so that at the end of the program we can measure that to drive the value of what we've delivered. Alignment. So in some instances we will talk to customers that will have an existing competency framework. And what we'll be able to do is collaborate and share that information and make sure that the content we're looking to deliver to that client is aligned and delivers against what they want to try and achieve. If we get those 2 right, then of course adoption will happen. People will want to use the content regularly. Now, I could say the best content in the world, but if you didn't have the right platform or the right way of getting to the content, it can become a challenge to get people to go back and use it again. So what I would say, and I know we touched upon platforms again earlier today, is I'll reinforce the point that I believe somebody told me that if after the first click of going into your LMS or content management system, for every click after the first click, you can lose up to 10% of your audience. So if it's 5 clicks in your existing LMS or platform, potentially you might lose up to 50% of your audience because they just find it too hard to get to what they want to use. So think about that in terms of what you have now, and if you're looking at LMSs in the future, think about that going forward. And finally, if we get those 3 right, then we can, of course, make the executives happy, the people that are signing off the checks, delivering against expectation, but also delivering on investment. So what's the message I would like you to take home? Well, continuous learning is the key, and continuous learning is about applying classroom, it's about applying digital, it's about combining both. So what we don't want to do is for the learners to attend a classroom and then forget half or 90% of what they learned. And what we can do to stop that from happening is by applying a blended solution of continuous learning to allow people to burn in and embed that knowledge so that it's not forgotten. I think that's my 15 minutes. Thank you very much for listening.
Also, thank you for your presentation. Thank you very much.